certainly in consulting, in our world of consulting, the selling process is really just an earlier stage of problem solving. Is this fundamentally going to make this organization better? Is it going to help this client succeed?
Make the case. Why keep hiring and developing juniors when AI can do so much?
That sort of fundamental disruption comes from the fact that the people who maybe have the most experience of adopting new tools are not necessarily the people that have had 3 more years of seniority and experience in the business. So the sort of the hierarchy doesn't lend itself to that cascading of knowledge that we need.
Welcome to Talent Talks by Be Impact, the podcast where we speak with leaders across professional services, technology, and consulting about what it really takes to attract, grow, and retain top talent. Hi, I'm Julian, CEO and founder of Be Impact, where we believe that teaching is not only the best way to learn, but also the best way to build the human skills AI cannot replace. And in each episode, we explore how firms are rethinking development, leadership, and culture, and what it takes to build teams that stay and thrive. And today, I'm very happy to be joined by Will Hayllar, who leads OC&C Strategy Consultants around the world. And I'll be honest with you on the top, Will, I want to do 2 things in this conversation today. First, I want to understand you, because your story is a bit of a lovely accident. You trained as an engineer, you were sponsored by the Ministry of Defense, and you spent summers working out how things worked at Airbus and Land Rover. And then you stumbled into strategy consulting, thinking you would do it for a couple of years and then get, in your own words, a real job. But now, a couple of years in, I guess, that was 25 years ago. And today you're the elected leader of the whole firm. And then I want to get into the thing you and I are also quite passionate about, which is upskilling and developing people, especially the human side, when AI now is changing the way we work, especially also with our technical skills. But let's start with you before we get into the future. Will, a very warm welcome on the show.
Thank you, Julian. Great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Marlborough Engineering, the Ministry of Defense. What was the young Will like? And what did working out how things physically fit together teach you that you might still use today in a completely different job?
I think the young Will was always interested in how things work, how systems work. I wasn't super original, so my father was an engineer. So was in a household where not just on technical things, but always interested in what was going on, a whole range of different topics, current affairs through to technical ones. But that meant from everything from sort of practically taking things apart and building things with my dad in the garage, through to the topics I probably found most interesting at school, sciences. And it was always that sense of being able to understand how a whole system works, what was making what happen, was something that I found both interesting and I guess I was good at in sort of analyzing and picking apart things and using logic to understand how that works. So, that was definitely a part of my sort of upbringing and background that that has flowed through into consulting. I think the other part, as I was reflecting on that question, was I lucky to be surrounded by lots of good people. So I have a big family, have 2 sisters and a brother, very big extended family, lots of friends around. My parents were very sort of sociable people. So, always lots of people around. And again, I think that sense of doing things together, doing things with people, is again something that has sort of flowed through ultimately into being part of why I failed to get a real job and stayed in consulting for this time.
And you've been honest with me in the sense that you said there was no master plan, and you just found the big or the slow organizations a bit frustrating, and consulting just looked interesting to you. And you joined then a 40-person boutique, thinking you would give it a couple of years and then get the real job. When did it stop being a 2-year plan and start being the thing that you wanted to build?
Yes, that's right. I suppose I'm a strategy consultant who didn't have a strategy for their own career in that sense. I would say I was probably 7 or 8 years into consulting before I really thought this might be the sort of the long-term option. At that point, I was an associate partner and had got. I think at that stage, I got enough of a sense of what being a partner was about, and particularly what selling work to clients was about, to perhaps change my mind and realize that was something, A, that I thought I would enjoy, and B, that I could be good at. And for me, the thing that made that switch happen was a realization that actually, certainly in consulting, in our world of consulting, the selling process is really just an earlier stage of problem solving. It's helping somebody to frame what the question is and how you might be able to help them. And that was the thing, it's the problem solving and helping people that I really liked. I didn't like the idea of being a salesperson and sort of turning up with something to try and convince someone that they should buy. So for me, that sort of understanding, which I got through, enough exposure to that stage of the process and starting to have clients trusting me and wanting my help, that really convinced me that the next stages of this would also be something that I would really enjoy, could be good at, and would be fulfilling. So it wasn't really until then that I felt this was likely to be a long-term plan.
But even that 6-7 years in is already quite a bit of time within consulting, where a lot of people leave, I guess, within well below the 2-year mark coming in. But yeah,
and I'd always sort of my only real guide as to should I stay doing this or not was I still enjoying it? Was I learning things? And if I felt those two things were true, then it felt like it was serving me well. Knowing again with a mindset that it probably was a path to doing something else at some point in time. That's maybe one of the benefits of consulting, is that you're not proceeding down a dead end. You're proceeding down a set of skills that you're building that are pretty widely applicable.
Yeah.
So for me, for the first 6-7 years, it was really that test. Am I enjoying it? Am I learning things? Am I working with people, spending time with people that I enjoy spending time with? That I get something out, some satisfaction out of achieving things with. That's a huge part of, huge part of all of our working lives. And therefore, if those things were all true, then I was happy continuing.
I guess, nobody makes that journey alone. You already started talking about how important it was to you to work with people that you enjoyed working with and learning from as well. We talked in our intro call about, I guess, 2 people that you said that really shaped you. Chris Outram, the founder, who you worked with directly as you were becoming a partner, and David, I'm not sure I'm offering, exactly his last name here, one of your predecessors. And maybe starting with Chris, what did he teach you about being, as you put it, a genuine advisor? That is not about the pack and the analysis. It's about how you help, I guess, the individual in front of you.
Yeah, and I was lucky to be in a position working very directly with Chris, as you say, was the founder of OC&C, so someone with consulting through his veins. He really helped me see and understand how this was really all about how do you help the client's organization to succeed, but also how do you help the individuals that are your direct clients navigate that, succeed themselves, and make the difficult decisions which are often involved in helping their organizations become successful. So that that really lifted what we were doing beyond the direct and analytical work, the direct presentations, and even the direct sort of formal meetings that we're having to understand actually really how we're trying to influence and help this person, this organization achieve something. So that real focus on is this fundamentally going to make this organization better? Is it going to help this client succeed? Was a real strong vein that I picked up from Chris.
And then I guess from David, you learned how to lead in a partnership, which you framed as serving a set of co-owners, I guess, rather than being a CEO. What's the hardest part of leading people who are also your owners and your equals?
Yes, it's quite a unique dynamic in a partnership, and ours is certainly a very genuine partnership where we absolutely want all of our partners to have a real voice in how the business develops. And I think, the key to that is sort of recognizing that and both, serving and harnessing the powers of that. And I think the things which take some effort and maybe you have to do more of than if you were a CEO with sort of hard power in a conventional business are really spending time engaging with that set of partners who are, have several hats on. They're your senior team. Some of them have got executive positions. Others of them are, brilliant commercially in their field. All of them are co-owners. So, when you're trying to make change happen, you need to spend more time making the case for that. You need to listen a lot. I think probably one of the things I have done reasonably well is listen and pick up a sense of actually what's important to the partners, what's motivating them, what's concerning them, and how you can bring that together into something coherent. And then you obviously, as an organization, do have to act. So you can't please everybody. Not everybody is 100% aligned. But that process of consultation and genuine consultation that helps to shape the way you go about doing things to get people on board is really important. So you have to put a good amount of energy into that and not underplay that over time. the sort of the flip side, which I think is where, the beauty of a partnership is all those people are co-owners. So ultimately, once we make a decision, people really are motivated by what's going to be the right thing for the organization. People have got that entrepreneurial hunger. They're not there sort of doing their day job. They're really there to help build the business. So there's a lot of power in a partnership in that way. So the trick is sort of harnessing the power and recognizing that you have to put some extra effort into creating the right kind of case for change.
Fantastic. And I guess these were two role models then that helped you on the positive side on role modeling. Is there also another side? Are there any people you came across? Obviously, you don't need to name them, but across the 25 years, were there any leaders who showed you what you didn't want to become and why that was the case?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of consulting, I suppose, is you get exposure to many different organizations, leadership teams, and lots of things you learn from people who are doing things brilliantly, but it also gives you some sense of different styles, and at least the ones that for me weren't resonant with what I wanted to be. And I think, where I came across situations where you have a very aggressive and sort of directive style of leadership, that isn't something that resonated with me or that I think would work in our partnership. And I've seen, there are certain situations where that style might be necessary. So if you're in real crisis mode to get things done quickly, that can be effective. But on average, what I've seen certainly in clients where that sort of leadership style has existed is it tends not to build the capability of other people around them. And therefore, over time, becomes a limitation, and it starts to choke growth and development of the business. So, it's always in my mind, not just how do we make the right decisions and get the right things done, but how do you try and do that in a way which is also building the capability of others around you and others in the team. And that's if you're doing that right, then you're really going to build a stronger organization over time and one that can keep growing.
Yeah, and I heard a lot within that also making sure essentially to actually making yourself replaceable, rather than the other way around of just defending your position, which is ultimately, not the way to build a team.
Yes, exactly. There's sort of, in many ways, succession is perhaps the best testament and the most important thing that any leader does over time. So, and the positive way of doing that, and particularly in a business which is like ours, has got plenty of growth opportunities, is making sure you're building lots of people that are capable of leading things, so it doesn't become a zero-sum game. It's about growing the capacity of the business to lead and to keep expanding.
And then I guess you said a lot of growth comes also through making mistakes and being willing to admit that they happen and that they are there. You told me about one hard one early in your partner days, where you had a difficult, almost dysfunctional client. The team bogged down in complexity and nobody really put up a hand early up enough essentially to say, hey guys, this isn't working. Let's reframe it. Walk me through that moment or that situation and what happened and what you learned from it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a perfect storm of challenges in the sense that actually it was one of those sort of leadership styles of someone who was quite aggressive, but in this case also quite indecisive, or at least the goalpost moved. So it wasn't always clear what was really going to land. That combined with the sort of the data that sat underneath trying to inform those decisions was messy, took a long time to manipulate and make sense of, overlaid with bits of politics in the client organization, which meant different people had a lot of vested interest in different answers, all of which, made it very difficult to make progress. And I think, that at that point in time, what I and the rest of our team did was sort of dig deeper, work harder, assume that we would just be able to sort of plow our way through it all. And I think that's probably quite a common mindset of people that are sort of determined and used to succeeding and motivated, that you just keep trying harder. And it did take, it took another advisor that was working on sort of parallel stream with us to sort of, to call out and say something, this isn't going in the right direction. Something needs to change. Let's take a step back and think about how we can reshape that. And I think what I definitely recognize do that is a pretty common human response, that when people are stressed, you tend to narrow the horizons of what you think is possible rather than broadening them out. And so someone who was sort of slightly peripheral, but observing that situation to be able to sort of spot that and intervene in a way which helps to then reframe and open out and say, actually, look, there are more ways we could go about this. There are different things, different choices we can make, different ways of shaping this to make sure we ultimately get to something successful. Yeah. So it was a painful lesson, but a valuable one.
In general, what makes it then hard to raise a hand, especially when a lot of things might going on in somebody else's life outside work as well? It was in the end, I guess you said, another advisor alongside you who called the pause. And how do you talk now with maybe some of your partners or leaders that are in those kind of positions to step up or into being that person for someone else?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Actually, it's probably has become a core thread of some of the formal training we give our partners around people leadership as well, which is recognizing, when something is going wrong somewhere, you're not happy with something. It might be how the team is doing the work, or some interaction with the client team that actually often that is because someone is struggling somewhere, and finding a way to unlock that, to intervene, to open up that dialogue and get to the root cause of what the challenge or the discomfort is, then creates the right conditions where everyone can start to reshape again. So I think that recognizing the value and the responsibility you have as a leader to be able to step in, to intervene, to open up those sets of possibilities when people that you're interacting with are sort of closing them down, I think that does become a really valuable thing to do and an important part of leadership responsibility.
All of that now adds up to a leader who told me he's generally not that motivated by sitting at the top of the hierarchy. That what you love is helping people you believe in achieve something, I guess, together. Where does that come from in you?
I think I've always enjoyed being part of a team. I suppose I talked about growing up in a family, and that's one form of team, groups of friends around. So, and I think through that, I've always found that ultimately achieving something as a team is the most rewarding form of achievement, certainly for me. And that, replicates through sporting, pastimes and hobbies, through different sort of ventures. And so that, that side of leadership, and again, particularly I think leading in an organization like a partnership where you're surrounded by leaders and co-owners, has been the thing which really resonates. And, what I've enjoyed, frankly, far more than I thought I might do when taking on this role, is the sense that, again, you're still, you're part of a team. You might have a specific role to play within that team. It's an important one, but you are part of a team, not a lone person deciding everything. So the more you harness the strength of that team, the more you help other people succeed to their best extent within that, the more you can achieve. Realizing and defining success as how much can you help other people achieve rather than what can you do yourself, is a much more scalable thing. And certainly it's the thing that maybe luckily or not for me, sort of naturally is most motivating.
Fantastic. And that is the perfect transition to move a bit more on the topic of employee and people development, I guess, which I want to spend some time talking with you about. And I guess you yourself were built by an apprenticeship, and I guess AI is a bit changing now how that model could look like also going forward. And I guess the way consultants have always learned is by sitting next to someone or being in a team with somebody that did the job 3 years before them. And you told me that AI is now breaking that model, maybe not just a little bit, but really on that end. Yeah. You said the fix has to maybe now cascade upwards and sidewards, and not just trickle down. What does that actually mean in practice for you at OC&C right now?
And I guess that's the fundamental disruption comes from the fact that people who maybe have the most experience of adopting new tools are not necessarily the people that have had 3 more years of seniority and experience in the business. So the sort of the hierarchy doesn't lend itself to that cascading of knowledge that we need. The approach we have been taking is to, I suppose, firstly recognize that, and then recognize that actually we still have people who've got more experience and are more advanced in their skills on these sort of new tools and technologies, and therefore, as long as you can recognize that, you can still have the cascade of knowledge. You can still have apprenticeship. You just found different conduits for it. So we have, identified AI champions in, across different parts of our business, who often were people who maybe just informally were most interested and started experimenting ahead of others and got themselves further up the learning curve. So once you've identified those people, and we now sort of formalize some of that role for those people, or at least that identification of those people, we can then cascade the knowledge out from those people to the teams that are sitting around them. So again, it's still a cascading of knowledge. It's still an apprenticeship model. It's just rewiring a little bit how that, on that particular dimension of apprenticeship, where the knowledge sits, where the experience sits, and therefore where it needs to cascade from. And I guess the complex thing about AI is this isn't just sort of an individual tool. It's not just a new Excel or something like that, where you could train it in quite a compartmentalized way, because to really harness the benefits of it does require whole teams to work in different ways and people to interact in different ways. And so for that reason, we run what we call red teams, which are sort of teams which we sometimes put in parallel on a project to really push the boundaries of what the AI technology will enable us to do, and how the team needs to work together and focus together and construct a different project rhythm to be able to really harness those things. So you have individual AI champions that have great bits of specific knowledge, and then you build in these teams sort of the experience of actually how do we best bring these things together. And again, those teams and the members of those teams become part of the sort of cascading out. So that's the approach so far.
I guess the absolute core of a great consultant, the critical thinking, the ability to structure a problem, to challenge, to convince, becomes now more important in an AI world, not less, is what you said to me. And why is that the case? Why more when the machines are getting so capable?
So, when the machines are getting more and more capable, the people need to sort of focus on the things which people are still uniquely well placed to do. And part of that, where decisions in most systems, there are some systems which are almost closed loop machine systems. Those are probably not in the world, but I and my teams sort of spend time in. But in most systems, you still have people that are making decisions ultimately. And if a good strategic advisor's core role is ultimately to help people make good decisions, then those skills of influencing, of understanding, of listening really hard in the first place to understand actually what's the nature of a decision, how are you going to get not just that person that you might be directly interacting with, but the organization around them confident to be able to take the right steps, even if the answer might be something which you can at least partly generate through the new tools more effectively. That becomes a really important part of that journey. And I think I'd also say, as I said, sort of the core critical thinking. How do you really frame the question? What tasks, what questions, what objectives are you setting different AI agents on? Again, I think is still something where the experience that you bring, the different patterns, the sort of non-obvious thoughts that you might be able to see, to experiment, to test different hypotheses. Not that you'll always be right each time, but that you can explore and sound out and ultimately build the right set of knowledge to get to robust conclusions. I think those two cores are absolutely part of where people can really harness and be more, become more powerful rather than become replaced by by all the advances in technology.
And I guess we can summarize those a bit more as what we call now then the human skills, and summarize as the soft skills, the advising, the influencing, the judgment. And I guess in that consulting profession, historically people have also been very much selected on some of the analytical capabilities and strength, like on how well they can or how quickly can they build a financial model or an analytical piece. How do you now deliberately or are you now switching that maybe selection process, but also then what you train people on deliberately more on soft skills instead?
So there definitely is a shift of emphasis to really highlight both of those two areas that we were talking about. And I think, even pre-AI, I'd say that core analytical thinking, in the truest sense, as in really being able to get to the fundamentals of something and understand, logically how something is working and what might drive it and where you're going to go looking. That skill, has always been sort of the core of things. And I think actually amongst those people that were maybe very good at building Excel models, let's say, we'd always found there were a subset who were doing that because they were really good at understanding the core fundamentals and okay at building the technicalities of the modeling. And those people tended to have a good linear kind of progression, would keep going because the thing that was underpinning their insight was, continued to be valuable as they went through. And conversely, there were some people who were maybe very good at technically building a model but were less skilled at really understanding and pulling apart the sort of underlying drivers of something. So they were numerate and sort of technical analysis, but not necessarily the sort of deeper underlying logical analysis and analytical skills. And that, has always been a sort of, they've often hit a glass ceiling within consulting, I think. I'm an optimist on these things. I think that if we get that right, both in the skills that you emphasize when we're recruiting and, as you say, the skills that we're really focusing development time and energy on, most of which comes actually from what are you really asking people to do on their jobs and in their projects, and a little bit comes from the formal training. If we get that right, there's actually more consistency and coherence of the skills that will help you succeed at the sort of in the early stages of consulting, with those that will equip you to keep succeeding as you progress through and become more senior, become a genuine trusted advisor. So I think there could be a better connection almost between what are we asking people to do in the early years of their career and what are the muscles which they need to have built to become really successful if they want to stay doing this for a long time.
I discussed this a bit with leaders that working on more technical consulting elements, so think developers and things. And there we talked a bit about the context of almost a driver license for juniors. So the danger is, I guess, or even if AI is now capable of building a financial model, how do we know that it's actually a really good model? So I guess we're flagging the danger that AI gives you something plausible very fast, but it might be wrong or just not good enough. And you said the danger zone is then actually this middle where people with some experience, but not enough, producing something that looks really sophisticated that isn't. Now within these technical consultancies, we talked about the concept of the driver license as we don't give them any AI until they build a certain code capability. And then when they have that, then they're allowed to use AI and then can do that much better. Is there some sort of thinking within that in how you currently see that some of the juniors starting at OC&C are maybe doing some of the Excel work where are they getting all the tools right now straight away, or is there a way, how do you tackle that problem within your field where I guess it's not as technical as writing code is, translating that to building, I guess, a good financial model? Or
yes, so it's not. I think that's right. It's not as so. The distinction isn't as black and white as perhaps those technical consulting coding conversations had surfaced. So we're not in a world of sort of restricting what people are using to until they've proven a certain point. It is more about really challenging the fundamentals of the work at all levels. And that's always been somewhat our sort of approach and style with senior people, sort of partners downwards engaged in the problem solving, and a lot of that through discussion, different people sharing bits of findings and then us discussing, challenging. Do we think that's real? What's really driving that? That seems surprising. Can we explain it? If we can't explain it, let's go away and look harder, because in the end, you need to be able to get back to the fundamentals of why something is happening, to be confident yourself that it's the right answer, and then to be able to convince others. So as long as you engage through the team in that activity, and you still place importance on that and recognize the fact that it's going to take probably more percentage of the time now to do that, because it's become quicker to create things. But a bit more of a need to question those things. Then you you shift the time, you shift the emphasis a little bit of what as a team you're focusing on. Then I think you can get there and mitigate that.
And that's, I guess, the critical point you mentioned earlier already when you talked about also the individual AI champions that you have that might be a bit younger and less experienced, but then combining that with the whole almost team of people that come and support the project on making the most out of AI. Is there also an emphasis more on maybe almost pairing up, like this kind of reverse mentoring situation where some of the youngers are deliberately paired up with more of the seniors to speed up maybe that process of understanding what good looks like and what maybe needs a second pair of eyes?
So there are. We're not formally pairing people up, but because of that approach, there are lots of instances where it will be a less experienced or at least a more junior person in the organization that's got the knowledge of how something works well, and they're sharing that with more senior people in the organization. So that, and I think the mindset to always want to learn is pretty strong in our business and the types of people that join a consultancy like ours. So that's as true from the senior team as it is from people that are newer into the business. So that dynamic is happening sort of every day, almost informally, because of the approach that we're taking to cascading the sort of specific AI skills. And I guess it's where you get those, that knowledge of how you might be able to get the tool, a tool to do something, and what the maximum you can get out of that is, that combined with some of the experience to think about what might actually be fundamentally driving things, or where the pitfalls are likely to be, becomes really powerful. But I think our main answer to that is to work well together in teams and make sure we're putting the right emphasis within those teams on the challenge and the thoughtful use of what we're going to ask these things to do, and then the challenge of the results that are coming out of it. There is
an ongoing debate right now with a lot of professional services firms that have traditionally the classical triangle structure with a lot of juniors on the bottom and a bit more seniors at the top, versus what's now seems to be coming a bit more in trend, which is, I guess, called the diamond shape, where you have then a bit thicker layer of middle to senior people that now apparently with the AI tools can harness the productivity the most over the juniors, and they stop hiring juniors. You told me you're still a believer in the triangle, and that firms like yours, if they stop training people, who else will basically develop them? So make the case for others in that situation. Why keep hiring and developing juniors when AI can do so much of what they used to do?
We're clear for a business like ours, which is an apprenticeship business, that if we're going to succeed over the long term, we need to still be able to harness young talent, train them, mold them in the things that are really important to be good at to do our job. And the nature of those things is definitely evolving. So the shape of what those junior people are going to do is changing, but the fact that you need them, if you're going to keep building up that middle layer, I think hasn't changed. So, a diamond-shaped business risks being an unsustainable one over the long term unless you've got good ways of replenishing that middle of the pyramid. And that's where there may be some advisory businesses where actually you have a good training ground somewhere else, and you can take those people. But in strategy consulting, that's really not the case. And so your primary route of getting great people is the people you hire in at the bottom and train up. And I think that will continue to be the case for us. So it's all the focus should be not on how many of those people do you need, but what do you need those people to do, and that's clearly changing. But I think having super smart, young, tech-savvy people who are adaptable, keen to learn. If you can't build and find ways for people like that to be productive, then we're in trouble. And I firmly believe that those people are an important part of the answer, an important part of how we harness this technology, and not replaced by it.
What's your message then to those that's studying currently engineering or business, or that are basically in university right now, and they have the aspiration to work in a company like OC&C? How should they select their courses? What emphasis maybe should they put on to be prepared for the skills that are now needed in the workforce to come in the next 2-3 years as they will enter the workforce?
So I think there are sort of the twin tracks of it is obviously helpful to be sort of fluent and capable and understanding of AI tools and what those technologies enable us to do. So, getting plenty of opportunity to experiment with those, use those, understand where they're working well, where the limitations are is important. But I think the bit I would put extra emphasis on is really those human skills that we were talking about before. And they're perhaps the ones that are not as obviously driven by the technology and the need to sort of learn how to use the technology, but I think are even more critical because of that. So finding opportunities to make sure you're working in teams, thinking about how you can communicate within those teams, thinking about where you can persuade people, influence people, as well as some of that stepping back and really thinking from first principles about how and why something might be working, might be happening, might be the answer. Those are the things that I think will really sort of help people step apart from. I think usage of the tools will become a hygiene factor over time as they become more widespread. It's not yet, and they're clearly developing fast, so that's different. But you wouldn't select your hiring of people now on the basis of their familiarity with the sort of competence in Microsoft Office suite, let's say, which might be in a period of time the equivalent of that, or the ability to type, or all these things which have been different, quite fundamental technological revolutions over time. So this is a more complex one, as we were saying. It's more multifaceted, but over time, that will become a hygiene factor in my view. And those other core skills will still be the things which really enable people to differentiate.
And I guess there is also an ongoing debate whether within the new generations coming out of school, just because of how used they are to digital tools, some of these more human skills are actually needing to be more developed than before, just because conflict has been more resolved through text messages rather than through a communication face to face.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we already saw that for the generations of people that were going through sort of formative education stages during COVID lockdowns. They really they missed out on some important development and had to catch up with just how you engage face to face, how you engage in person, and the power of doing that in the right situations. Mm-hmm. And again, for consultants where your clients are sometimes spread all over the world, there's huge power in being able to engage remotely and using the technology to do some of these things. But selectively, there's still real value in being together and being able to influence people in a different way and forming relationships through that. So I think that the best people coming through now will not have replaced old skills. They'll have just added to them and have a broader armory of tools to use to engage with people, to engage with the problem, and to join those things up. But ultimately, that ability to still influence people, still build relationships with people, I think is important.
Last one might be a bit tricky to answer holistically, but let's say you are the learning director and the head of AI in a company, and you have to share one KPI for the next year. How would you actually measure whether your people can generally challenge the machine rather than just defer to what it hands to them?
Yeah, it's tricky to distill this down into one KPI. But I think if I was trying to do that, I would be tracking and trying to track the proportion of sort of instances. We might define that as a project or a module of a project or a sub-question, but the proportion of those things where actually the interaction of the team has enabled us to get to a better answer than came directly from the AI. So either that's by challenging and finding errors in something where it was sort of hallucinating, or by building on some really useful parts, but making them even more valuable by connecting, by making a connection, by thinking about how to frame it to land with that particular client in a different way. So I'd be looking to say, what's the proportion of our output ultimately where we have built upon but not relied solely upon the output of AI.
As we discussed in this conversation, AI is making the analysis easy and putting all the weight more on the human skills, judgment, critical thinking, the art of advising, and how you build those in people who no longer get the 30 years to learn them slowly or without AI. And I guess that's exactly what we do at Be Impact. We help firms to develop those human skills by having their people teach what they know to teams and nonprofits and startups, real stakes, but no commercial risk. And because, as we all know, the deepest way to sharpen your own understanding is to have to teach it to someone else. And that same act, though, cascades knowledge sideways and upwards, and exactly the way you said now, I guess it has to. So for a firm, what it means is that learning that actually sticks, a faster way to build critical thinking in juniors, and essentially, developing them on the job with real people, but low stakes. And if any of that sounds useful to you, the natural next step is having maybe a conversation on your development side with me. And you can reach me at julian@beimpact.co.uk or visiting our website, beimpact.co.uk. Right, back to this episode. Will, the last bit is our quickfire. So, short answers, first instinct, whatever comes out. The single most valuable skill at work in 2026, in 3 words of you?
I think engaging with people to be my answer to that, having talked to you for the last hour.
One thing every firm should stop doing in learning and development.
I would say framing AI learning and AI capability as a solely technical topic and about purely being about the usage of tools. I think it needs to be about all of that wider set that we've talked about, and the importance of those human skills. So I think there's a mistake of making it too narrow a topic.
Yeah. And maybe that answers the second question. One thing every firm should double down on right now.
Yes, I think it does. So I would say those human skills, the real critical thinking to be able to challenge and get to the root cause of something, and then the ability to engage with people to influence, both to learn, listen, learn, and pick up nuance and context, and then ultimately influence around the answer.
The best leadership lesson you ever got, and who you got it from?
I think that would be about picking the right people for the positions that where you need things to happen. So ultimately, if you get that right, then the vast majority of other things go reasonably well. If you get it wrong, it's hard work, and you're unlikely to make lasting change. So that's that is the best lesson I think that I've learned, and I've probably picked that up. I say there's no one person that I've learned that from. It's come from a whole plethora of experiences.
A talent mistake you've made that you will hopefully never make again.
Maybe in that same vein, sometimes spotting real talent in somebody, but perhaps putting them into a position where they're overexposed and haven't got quite the support or the clarity around them to succeed. So almost just, generally we succeed a lot in organizations like ours by having really talented people and stretching them, and giving them the next challenge, and people rise to that. And so just spotting there are times where you can push that too far and somebody starts to be overwhelmed by that. So making sure that you've got either the right support mechanisms in place, or you're calibrating that right, because you don't want someone to have a setback because they've just been given a sort of impossibly broad brief too soon in their career.
Yeah, that is, I guess, really, really good advice on that end. And the very last question is the one of having a magic wand, unlimited time, unlimited budgets. And you can change one thing about how your industry is approaching the development of people again. What would you change?
In consulting, I think I would give more people more experience of being on the other side of the fence. That's understanding actually what is it that clients really need, what makes the difference to how they can absorb and act on the advice that we give. I think, where we have secondments into clients, for instance, those are always hugely valuable situations for our consultants. So, more of that, whilst recognizing, I think because of the core consulting skills that we need to develop for our people to be able to be effective, we have to train and recruit from the bottom up. We can't just hire hundreds of people out of industry with mid-levels of experience. That doesn't work. You need the blend of the two. But adding a little bit of that into more of our people is, I think, really valuable.
Fantastic. Well, Will, with those last words, thank you so much for this conversation. What I take from this is from a man who came for a couple of years and then stayed 25. Someone who learned the craft, I guess, of advising from the people around him, and who was honest about the times where you failed and where you got stuck, and that you learned from that. And now who has to help reinventing, I guess, a little bit the way that the consulting world works in terms of learning and upskilling their people. And yeah, I was really enjoying how honest and direct and clear the answers were that you were giving to this. So I learned a lot from this conversation, and so I hope that so did our audience, hopefully. And for anyone listening who maybe wants to follow your work, learn a little bit more about your work at OC&C as well, where's the best place to find you or learn more about the work you do?
The best place is via our website, so OC&CStrategy.com. And from there, you can link to profiles. You can see some of the thinking that we're developing in different industry structures. If you're interested in roles, you can apply for them. So everything really kind of runs through the website. You can also follow on LinkedIn, and find different bits of thinking coming out there. So those would be the two places that's probably best for people to engage if they're interested.
Fantastic. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to follow Talent Talks wherever you get your podcast. Leave a rating if you can, and share it widely with your friends, with your colleagues, and anyone that you would think would get something out of the show. That's how it will reach more people, and that's basically how it can support us in these early days of the podcast. So, Will, thank you again, and to everyone listening. Until next time, keep learning, keep teaching, keep making your work mean something. This has been Talent Talks by Be Impact.